I've used my fair share of emulation handhelds at this point, and one that I always find myself coming back to again and again and again is the AYN Odin 2. I love my Odin 2. It has been consistently one of my favorite handhelds, and it's one that I recommend the most often for at least high-end buyers, because the Odin 2 is still incredibly powerful, and there have been multiple handhelds since that have tried to take that crown, but in my opinion, all challengers have failed to meet the bar. Whether it's a lack of performance, lack of driver support, or even overall just bad design. And I love my Odin 2 so much. It has stuck out through thick and thin and has consistently performed fantastically. Having very little issues and outside of the original setup has been just a dream to use. I personally use an Odin 2 base model mainly because the other, Pro and Max models don't really offer that much performance increase. Sure, the extra RAM can be nice, but we've reached the point where the sort of performance gap is mainly seen through, not necessarily a lack of performance, but due to driver development and just overall optimization on the part of the emulators. Because most of these Android-powered devices are incredibly powerful, and more than powerful enough to run most of these titles, especially if you have a Snapdragon chip inside. It's gonna probably be more powerful than you'd think, but just due to the lack of optimization and, full driver support and just needing, more work done on it, you don't necessarily get to utilize all that performance, and typically you use that extra performance to sort of brute force your way into having decent performance just because you're having to deal with a lot of overhead due to the poor optimization you find in most emulators. Especially when you start getting into modern consoles, you run into that consistently, especially with the Nintendo Switch. The good performance doesn't come from the emulators, it comes in spite of the emulators. These modern processors in these emulation handhelds have reached a point where they are just leaps and bounds ahead of what we typically see. But just due to, like I mentioned before, the poor optimization, it has, problems still. But thanks to the Odin 2 in particular, I don't really ever see those issues. The Odin 2 is just so incredibly powerful with its Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 2 processor in the base model, 8GB of RAM. I don't really want more than that. Power is, at this point, at a point where you don't need more, and it's just time is what you need. So might as well pick a device that you can really enjoy for the long haul. And for me, the Odin 2 satisfies most of my needs. If I were to buy a new device, it would be the Odin 2 Mini. But for owners who already have an Odin 2, I wouldn't recommend buying that. I know I'm not, but it is an incredible device. The same power, smaller size, and better screen, I would be so happy with that. But I already own the Odin 2, and it's kind of hard to justify buying another device that's going to perform nearly identically with slightly worse battery life due to the smaller size. So that has changed my opinion a little bit of the Odin 2, but overall, I still highly recommend the Odin 2, especially if you're looking for a 7-inch device. The Odin 2 is by far one of the best handhelds out there. There have been some more competitors since then. There have been some competitors since the original release of the Odin 2. Mainly you see very commonly compared is the AYN Neo Pocket S, which is a substantially popular device, and I've made my own video talking about it, and I have to say, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It is $400 as a base. You can spend all the way up to nearly $1,000 on this device, and yeah, it has a nice screen. 1440p is phenomenal. But 1TB of storage is a little unnecessary, and while it has an amazing glass and metal design, I'm not going to pay the extra dollar for that, especially when it performs nearly identically or a little worse than the Odin 2. It has a Snapdragon G3X2 chip. The original chip of that generation was found in the Razer Edge, which was a terrible handheld Razer released not too long ago. It was absolutely dog crap. It barely was able to run GameCube and PS2 games, and it wasn't for a lack of performance. These two chips are incredibly powerful, but even more so with these chips is a massive lack of driver development and optimization for these emulators. Because there's only so many chips these emulators can optimize for, they have to start really choosing what they spend their time on developing. Because most of these apps are free. You can't expect developers to work for free forever. So these developers have to really pick and choose what platforms they choose to optimize for. And broadly speaking, they optimize for the most popular Android chips, which tend to be Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 2, that line of chips. Snapdragon 8 series chips are consistently the most popular chips found in modern smartphones. In these last 8 months with the Odin 2, it has been phenomenal. Performance has never been a problem for me. And the Odin 2 base model in particular has 8 GB of RAM, and there are higher end models, the Pro, the Max, that you can also buy. And sometimes they include more storage, but it just never seemed all that practical. And some recent performance data shows that they run nearly identical. Sure, there's like a few extra FPS here and there for the extra RAM, but like I mentioned before, we've hit the ceiling when it comes to the performance we need for these emulators. Now we just need to wait for the emulators to catch up to better utilize that. And the Odin 2 is the perfect device to buy for the long haul, especially if you're just getting its emulation and you want to buy something really nice to start, or if you're a person who's been emulation for a long time and you've been meaning to upgrade. The Odin 2 is a perfect option for people who want a long haul investment level device that can sustain them for quite some time for the years to come, because the Odin 2 offers enough performance to emulate Nintendo Switch games, for Christ's sake, at a better FPS than an actual Nintendo Switch. And you get all of that for $300, the same price as a Nintendo Switch, while offering the same in more performance, especially when you're emulating Nintendo Switch games. And overall, it's just a very cohesive package. There's a certain allure to having a whole all-in-one system. I typically tend to recommend people to start emulation on a smartphone. You can buy a super cheap controller, or you can use an Xbox controller you already have and just connect it via Bluetooth and enjoy all of your emulation that way. And that's a great way to do it, because it's gonna have very similar hardware to a lot of the higher end devices you're gonna be trying out, and might as well just wait and see if you like it. And that's why I think the Odin 2 in particular makes the most sense, because you can easily transition from that learning stage on your phone into a device with a very familiar performance level and overall familiar interface, because you don't want to have to relearn a whole new operating system to be able to use these things. And I get it, it's not that hard and it's fairly self-explanatory, but for a beginner, opening something like from Anbernic could be really challenging, because some of the devices have some problems, especially with their base firmware. And you can't expect newcomers to easily understand how to reflash or install custom firmware. And especially if you're buying a new device, you shouldn't rely on the community to eventually release custom firmware for a device that might never get it. You should never buy a device based on the promises of what it could be versus what it is now. I've utilized the Odin 2 in many different ways. I have my original dock from the original Odin that has all the, GameCube and N64 controller ports, and it's my favorite thing to bring whenever I'm doing family game night, because me and my uncle, who bond over retro games, like to set up the Odin 2 and be able to play Smash Brothers or Mario Kart 64. Technically, all these most of the time are N64 games, mainly because N64 controllers suck, our N64 kinda sucks, and it's not modded or has any, hardware on the TV or anywhere on the console itself to allow HDMI, at least cleanly. So the Odin 2 in its dock would pair quite nicely for a modern TV setup, allowing you to play your favorite games on a high resolution display. Sometimes the scaling can get a little weird, but it's manageable. But overall, the Odin 2 has been one of my favorite devices. And personally, I recommend this device all the time. And after 9 months, I still recommend this device. It has consistently been one of my favorite devices, and to this day, it is one of my favorites, and I hope it will be for the years I will have it to come. What are your thoughts? Do you love your Odin 2? Have you used your Odin 2 for quite a long time? What are the use cases you're using it in? I'd be very interested to hear about it. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All the other social media garbage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.